Give of yourself unto the god Umbra all that you have. For it was he upon the golden throne who first gave unto you all that you are. Heed not the blandishments of the witch, lest their lies grind away thine soul like waves upon the strongest stone. Instead, make of them a blazing pyre. It is through suffering that humanity may earn the Emperor's forgiveness for its countless sins. The pain of the wicked brings salvation to all. The God Emperor decreed all the galaxy belonged to his sons and daughters, and that the alien is an uncleanness that must be expunged. Seek not for answers, nor for understanding, nor enlightenment. Find strength instead in your faith and in your hatred. And so be content.
In the 41st millennium, the Imperium of Man is beset on all sides by enemies both human and inhuman alike. For 10,000 years, the Emperor's Angels of Death have stood as mankind's first line of defense. But of the many hundreds of chapters and successor chapters, there are none more devout, more zealous, and perhaps more brutal than the Black Templars, who wage an unyielding and unending crusade across the stars, scourging the heretics, mutants, xenos, and demons from the galaxy without exception. Their visage is one of unwavering righteous fury. Clad in stark black and white, a wall stood against the horrors of an increasingly hostile galaxy. The Templars do not deal defeat to their enemies, they erase them. Nor are the worlds they touch considered conquered rather than purged. But what if their faith isn't a holy light? What if it's simply a raging fire that consumes everything it touches? The Black Templars' 10,000-year existence has been a single 10,000-year war against anything or anyone that they decide is a foe of the Emperor or his Imperium. Their brutality isn't defined by their ability to win battles. Brutality to the Emperor's foes is their core belief, their sacrament. If there happened to be a dictionary aboard their flagship, the Eternal Crusader, the word mercy would quite literally be burned out. In order to unveil the truth of their violence and understand why you'd more likely refer to them as purifiers than just warriors, we need to go back to the beginning, to their sire. Not the Primarch Rogel Dorn's fatherhood, but that of their truer father. The one who forged their spirit within the flames of the Horus heresy, Sigismund. Before they were Black Templars, they were Imperial Fists, the seventh of the Emperor's legions Astartes. Sigismund was their first captain, and his first company was known as the Templar Brethren. They were a remorseless and zealous fighting group, guardians of the Temple of Oaths aboard the Phalanx. They excelled in close-quarters combat. The charge of the Templar Brethren is exactly why Sigismund rose to become its captain, and first captain of his chapter. For none personified this courage of will and zeal the way Sigismund did. And more than that, his skill with the blade was legendary, even against the skill of the transhuman legions Astartes. Sanguinius himself said of Sigismund that he seemed less my brother Dorn's champion and more death's himself. The fire of the Crusader burned brightest in Sigismund, and this was exemplified during the Siege of Terra. When the arch-traitor and his forces stormed across the planet, Sigismund was chosen by the Emperor himself to be his champion. His heraldry was changed to black, and he wielded the black sword given to him by both the Emperor and Destiny. Tasked with marching into hell on earth and challenging the champions of chaos to single combat. Such was the prelude to everything the Black Templars would become, the embodiment of everything Sigismund was. It is important to highlight Sigismund, not just because he founded the Black Templars and was its first Grand Marshal, but because of how his ideals shaped the fanatical unending war to come. But zealotry can seem like mindless savagery without true cause, that zealots throw themselves into the meat grinder to fight and die simply because their unwavering faith dictates it. Which is why I love the exchange that Sigismund and the Emperor shared when they shook hands upon Eleanor, and Sigismund was granted a vision of his stalwart purpose for humanity.
"You wish for peace,"
said the man.
"Yes,"
said Sigismund.
"You will not have it,"
said the man.
"But your life has been lived for a purpose. You have purpose." "What purpose?"
"To stand."
"Why?"
"Because someone must." Sigismund's faith was absolute in the God Emperor, but so was it in the duty he was given. A higher calling from a higher power is zealotry given purpose. A zealot given purpose from their God becomes a mindless savage to any and all that oppose his God, which I think is an important distinction, especially when we consider the brutality in which the Black Templars will act. So, upon founding the Black Templars, Sigismund's duty is of course installed as an institution of the chapter's purpose, just as his faith would form the core of their beliefs. And when the Black Templars arose from the second founding, Sigismund swore an oath that he would never stop fighting the Emperor's wars, and that the Great Crusade shall continue tenfold through him and his Templars. Though they were founded after Guilliman penned the Codex Astartes, the Black Templars were born of that oath, and driven by the fanatical rage and pitiless fury of Sigismund himself. The seeds of brutality were sown, and the galaxy would become a pyre for the enemies of the God Emperor. The Black Templars' brutality isn't random for its own sake, as those on its receiving end might believe. It is, for lack of a better word, their worship, how they practice their religion. Their tradition of chaining their weapons to their wrists also reflects this, indicating that the only way they will ever stop fighting is when the blackness of death takes them, or when the enemies of the Emperor cease to exist entirely. This doctrine of annihilation is built upon a few core principles. The first is their relationship with the Codex Astartes. At the end of the Horus Heresy, when Guilliman penned the Codex and the second founding occurred, Sigismund was fine with taking his pick of his most zealous brethren, taking on the black and white heraldry given to him as the Emperor's champion as this new chapter's colors, and going to make more war. What Sigismund wasn't fine with was the idea of adhering to all the strictures meant to force him and his chapter into what Guilliman's ideas were, and that in itself struck Sigismund as an insult to the teachings of his own Primarch. Sigismund refused to be shaped by these tenets, and I don't want to say that the Black Templars completely and utterly reject every facet of the Codex Astartes. They just don't see it as law. The conversation was probably a bit like this.
"Sigismund, here is the Codex Astartes. Read it well, and abide by its tenets, or so be in violation of the law. Thank you, Guilliman, for this wonderful book of optional guidelines. I will absolutely, at some point, possibly read this. Perhaps."
Don't be ridiculous. Thank you.
And thus, Sigismund instead swore his oath that would become the law for the Black Templars, to prove his loyalty and to never rest in the prosecution of his duties against the enemies of the Emperor. It is the oath that started their 10,000-year-long crusade, echoing the Emperor's Great Crusade. Sigismund and the Black Templars' belief in the Emperor's complete and total divinity was wielded the way many other chapters of Space Marines viewed the Codex Astartes. But if all that the Black Templars do is in service to the God Emperor, and they do so in his express blessing, then what do the words of any man, or demigod even, hold against the will of a god?
Uphold the honor of the Emperor. Trust in the Emperor at the hour of battle. Trust to him to intercede and protect his warriors true as they deal death on alien soil. Turn their seas to red with the blood of their slain. Crush their hopes, their dreams, and turn their songs into cries of lamentation.
The second of the Black Templars' principles is their profound, all-consuming hatred of the Psyker. Abhor the witch, destroy the witch, as you'd repeatedly hear if you ever hung out with Black Templars for any extended period of time. Psykers are a gateway to chaos and a time bomb of damnation. Chaos is, seemingly, and at least according to the Black Templars, the antithesis of the Emperor. Thus, their hatred to those connected to it, albeit willingly or otherwise, is absolute. But there is a complicated exception: navigators and astropaths. There are many accounts of the Black Templars having the thinnest amount of tolerance for them, as they are necessary for traversing the galaxy and upholding their oaths and duties to the Emperor. But again, they are barely tolerated, especially navigators, as they are both Psyker and mutant, and treated no better than slaves. But there are also accounts of navigators being treated with an air of reverence from the Black Templars, and though they are not necessarily comfortable with them, they admire them for their ability to see the very light of the Emperor himself, the Astronomicon. What can be said for certain, however, is that if you're not a Psyker that falls under this gray area, then you're a stain on the purity of humankind, and all that you can be is cleansed with fire.
Abhor the witch, destroy the witch. Smite now the scions of the witch. Grant us the strength to pierce their unclean flesh, to cover their fields with the pale forms of their blasphemous dead, to drown the thunder of guns with the shrieks of their dying, to lay waste to their citadels with unavailing grief, to send them into the wastes of their desolated land in rags and hunger, broken in spirit, worn with travail, and begging for the refuge of the grave. We ask it in the spirit of wrath, O Master of mankind.
The third and arguably most defining part of the Black Templar doctrine is their penchant for showing absolutely zero mercy in any given situation. Mercy is a weakness. It is through suffering that they believe mankind will earn the Emperor's forgiveness for their myriad sins, and ramp that up to 1,000 in regards to the suffering of anyone they've deemed an enemy. Whether you're an orc, a dissident human, a Tau, the list goes on. And once you're on that list,
whoo! Danger, danger, danger.
But this rule of absolutely no mercy isn't a double standard. It applies to themselves just as rigorously. No remorse, no surrender. They will willingly die fighting the enemies of the Emperor without the thought of surrendering even crossing their minds. It is their duty to suffer so. This is why they chain their weapons to their wrists, for there is no mercy for anyone when the Black Templars are present. Kill or be killed. All this merciless killing in the name of the God Emperor to cleanse humanity of its wickedness is a holy ritual, be it their enemies or to themselves. Suffer and so be cleansed. Such is the duty of a Black Templar. Endless hate, barren of mercy, and absolute in brutality.
Suffer not the unclean to live. Lead us from death to victory, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from faith to slaughter. Lead us to his strength and an eternity of war. Let his wrath fill our hearts. Death, war, and blood, in vengeance serve the Emperor in the name of Dawn!
A doctrine of annihilation is one thing in theory, but the Black Templars have put that theory into practice for 10,000 years. Their history is a scar carved deep across the face of the Milky Way, a trail of purged planets and ruined civilizations. Thus far, we've uncovered why the Black Templars favor uncompromising brutality. Now we'll dig into the how. It would be unfair to say that the Black Templars don't care about civilians, even if their objectives cost human lives. It would be more precise to say that they care about humanity as a whole, just as the Emperor did. But one man, or hundreds, or thousands, even potentially millions, how can they compare to the larger picture? The untold billions of human lives in the galaxy. So, regardless of their mission, they don't go out of their way to inflict casualties on the human population, but they also don't go out of their way not to. It's really just an it is what it is situation. A good example of this would be the cleansing of hive worlds, which are all too prone to infection. Be it demons, heretics, gene stealers, and the like. Where other Imperial forces may argue for a more surgical approach to the situation and aim for attempts to save the uninfected and innocent population, the Black Templars do not. To them, the planet is already tainted. The presence of the alien or heretic has corrupted it entirely. And so, according to the Black Templars, the solution is a full-scale planetary purge, where the distinction between cultist or alien and loyal citizens becomes very tragically irrelevant. Better to cut the head of the snake and not risk the corruption spilling out any further into the galaxy. The planet can be repopulated at another time. And while this is straightforward in its approach and simple, it is still rather brutal. At least depending on your philosophical views, I suppose. There is a great quote that sums it all up pretty perfectly from Inquisitor Barzano, who was investigating the worlds left in the wake of the Black Templars' Garen Nebula crusade. He says, "I saw a scene of a massacre, where the dead lay on the ground in numbers like fallen leaves in a forest. The settlers had not died as soldiers die in the heat of battle, fired with ardor and courage, with weapons in their hands exchanging blow for blow. They had died as the helpless must, with their hearts filled with horror worse than death itself." High Chaplain Grimaldus and the Third War for Armageddon are a great example that this no-mercy-backed brutality extends to themselves just as much as anyone else. When Armageddon was flooded under a biblical tide of greenskins, led by none other than Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, the Black Templars answered the call. There, Grimaldus was charged by High Marshal Helbrecht to lead the ground forces at Hive Hell's Reach, while the High Marshal oversaw the theater of war among the stars. Grimaldus centered his defense in Hive Hell's Reach at the temple of the Emperor Ascendant, and there, After 2 full months of fighting, the orcs were finally able to punch their way into the temple precincts. As this happened, the Astra Militarum soldiers began fleeing in horror from the Greenskin rampage, while the undaunted Black Templars continued the fight. It was during this desperate stand that Grimaldus was said to have uttered these famous words: "I have dug my grave in this place, and I will either triumph or I will die." It was this moment of merciless resolve, of "I will kill my enemies or I will simply die," that reignited the resolve of the fleeing men. They had not wished to fail the Emperor in the presence of his most fanatical warriors. As such, the brutal zeal of the Black Templars was stoked in their own hearts. So ferocious and uncompromising was the renewed strength of the Emperor's servants that it brought the very walls of the temple crashing down upon both armies, putting an end to the anarchic meat grinder within. Grimaldus, feared to be one of the casualties, would later emerge from beneath the ruined stone and ceramite, unbroken, and having recovered 3 of the temple's precious relics. But perhaps the greatest example of how far a Black Templar will push their brutality in the name of purity and righteousness is when it is turned inward. In the era Indomitus, there is quite a bit going on within the Imperium. The Great Rift is torn open, Rebute Gilliman's resurrection, and Belisarius Call's creation of the Primaris Space Marines through the Rubicon Primaris procedure. Faster, stronger, smarter, the Primaris Marines were sent out across the galaxy to the chapters and successor chapters of their gene sires to aid the beleaguered armies of the Imperium. For the Black Templars, however, this was treading the line of blasphemy. They didn't reject the Primaris because they feared weakness, but because they feared corruption. Who was called to meddle with and change the very works of the Emperor? Who was he to tamper with the light of their god? It took Gilliman himself giving High Marshal Helbrecht a pretty stern and insightful talking to for the High Marshal to mandate the chapter-wide policy of allowing the Primaris into their ranks. However, an ideology built upon zealotry, brutality, and hatred can become dangerous if left unchecked. This would become unmistakably clear in the Angevin Crusade. This crusade, under the command of Marshal Angevin, swore fealty to Rebute Gilliman and approved of the High Marshal's acceptance of the Primaris Marines. The problem lay within the ranks of the Black Templars under Angvin's command. And when the Primaris reinforcements with their accompanying custodian arrived, mutiny broke out. With encouragement from Castellan Bjorthnoth and his chaplain Mortian, the Black Templars let their marshal and the newcomers know their true thoughts about the Primaris.
I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
They believed the Primaris were heretical and impure, a blasphemous stain on the God Emperor's divine work. So blinded by their faith and their rage and their inclination toward brutality, the mutineers slaughtered their marshal, the Primaris Marines, and the custodian that accompanied them. Such was the depth of their unwavering fanaticism that some Black Templars, even amongst their brothers, would become willing to spill not just the blood of their own, but that of one of the Emperor's own custodians. All because they truly believed that they, and they alone, remained true to his divine vision. The Black Templars are not born this way. No child emerges from the womb as a black-armored crusader, screaming prayers to the God Emperor through a hate-filled heart. Their brutality is not natural. It is cultivated, hammered into them through pain, faith, and war. Though I'm sure at least some of them were probably natural-born serial killers. But I digress. To become one of the radicalized Black Templars, you must first be selected as a prospect, a neophyte. There are a couple different ways this can happen, as the Black Templars don't have a home world from which to recruit upon. Instead, in their ever-branching crusades, they erect chapter keeps on the worlds they conquer, or bring into compliance, if the Inquisition asks. Due to the nature of a world that attracts the attention of the Black Templars to begin with, their people are inevitably already hardy and violent, a convenient prerequisite for turning into brutal and fanatical zealots. But you either volunteer yourself by presenting the head of some sort of slain mutant or witch at a chapter keep for the chance to become a neophyte, or you're literally stolen off the streets of a ruined city. But it's important that they're still young enough to undergo both the surgical procedures to become a Space Marine and the psycho-spiritual indoctrination to become one of the Emperor's chosen warriors. That and display a good amount of hate and ferocity. But wherever these neophytes come from, they may think that joining such an elite fighting force under the guidance of a higher power is their ticket to a life free from the hardships of their hard planets. They are soon disabused of this notion. Every recruit for every Space Marine chapter is put through rigorous testing of their strength, endurance, determination, and intellect. The Black Templars are no different, but in addition to these attributes, they also want to test an aspirant's faith. These tests are probably the most punishing and brutal of all, and span a myriad of different feats. Trials such as running barefoot races across coals, fighting each other in complete darkness while vox emitters blare questions about scripture that they're compelled to answer while fighting blind, making leaps of faith from fatal heights unaware of the hidden grav traps below, plunging their arms into blazing braziers while having to perfectly recite prayers to the Emperor, battling psyker prisoners, and many other wild and crazy things, all the while dealing with the excruciating pain of their bodies adapting to their implanted organs. Pass all these tests, and you are transformed into a ceramite-hard, fanatical killer loyal only to the God Emperor and their chapter, in that order. But the shapes and faces of brutality extend far beyond their neophytes. It goes all the way to the top, to the High Marshal, modeled of course upon the first of its kind, Sigismund. All High Marshals since the chapter's founding are worthy successors to Sigismund, but perhaps none more so than the current High Marshal Helbrecht. Helbrecht is a perfect example of brutality not being limited to physicality, but extending to the mental and philosophical aspects as well. For the Black Templars, this manifests in the oaths they swear. To them, these oaths are more than just a promise. It becomes a part of their identity, and a sacred burden they carry with them always, until death or its fulfillment. No living Templar personifies this more completely than High Marshal Helbrecht, for he is a man of many oaths. Famously his oath of vengeance against the Necron Stormlord Imhotep, who during a duel with Helbrecht spared his life but severed a hand to serve as a constant reminder of his defeat. Helbrecht carries that with him every day and everywhere he goes. A man permanently trapped in a state of holy and righteous vengeance against not only his sworn enemies, but against those of the Imperium and the chapter he leads. That is weaponized hatred. A hatred that, for Helbrecht, borders upon psychosis. Certainly Helbrecht wasn't the first nor the last Black Templar to swear an oath of vengeance upon an enemy, but it is just another facet of the Black Templars that keeps them further from their humanity and living a life that has to be brutal in every aspect. This hatred defines them even, as where another man may eventually settle upon forgiveness. A Black Templar instead sharpens this hatred and swears an oath. And it is the embers of this psychological brutality that keep them warm amidst the cold void, just as the blood of their enemies, in the face of their physical brutality, could technically keep them warm. So, how brutal are the Black Templars? The answer is completely. It is absolute. Not a flaw, but a feature working exactly as intended. Born from the rage of Sigismund that still burns brightly within the crusading ships of the Black Templars as they cross the galaxy in the era Indomitus. No mercy, no salvation, just war in its purest, most brutal form. But what do you think? Are the Black Templars brutal but necessary in the 40k universe? Or are they a monstrosity that has lost its way? Let me know your favorite Black Templars war crimes in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, consider giving it a like or subscribing if you haven't. Thanks so much for watching. Be good people.
Accept any challenge, no matter the odds. O Emperor, in wrath rejoicing at bloody wars, fierce and untamed, whose mighty power doth make the strongest walls from their foundation shake. All-conquering master of mankind, be pleased with this war's tumultuous roar. Delight in swords and fists red with alien blood, and the dire ruin of savage battle. Rejoice in furious challenge and avenging strife, whose works with woe embitter human life.